The issue of ivory trade and Zimbabwe's track record in really pushing the envelope to conserve these imperiled species is excellent, and their commitment to the convention has stood the ground over the years. And coming from CITES COP19 in Panama, it's literally just 1 month. And I do believe the government of Zimbabwe, as well as the entirety of the SADC bloc, are very keen to make sure that they play according to the provisions of the conventions that they are party to. I do not believe at this stage it would be correct to conclude that the whole region is keen to dissociate themselves from CITES. But what continues to be their approach is to explore alternatives of how communities can coexist with wildlife and elephants in particular, so that they can derive benefits from the sacrifices they make. The International Fund for Animal Welfare works very closely with the government of Zimbabwe, and we are working on the ground in the Hwange National Park, which is the main source and has the largest elephant population. Our standing in this conservation partnership is very good. The Honorable Minister, the leadership of ZimParks are all upbeat of what we can do to explore options that allow for benefits to accrue. And it's not like the government is looking at the sales of ivory or rhino horn as the only panacea, but certainly exploring smart partnership, private sector, consistent with the mantra of open for business in Zimbabwe.
As you say, there are competing priorities, and the question I was asking really is, does Zimbabwe have a point in terms of what it's saying? We understand that the country has more than 130 tons of ivory stored up in high security vaults that could help to fund wildlife conservation. So it's not necessarily an obstinate position from what I hear, but it is saying that it is important if weighing up, the ecosystems, ensuring that humans and animals can coexist in a sustainable manner.
They have a point, and what they have now explored is what other mechanisms can allow for the funding of conservation and protecting wildlife and improvement of human well-being, which do not just look at the stockpiles that are there. Part of the reality check that the government has logically done is to note there are provisions within the convention, and there are also parties on the side of would-be consumers for the ivory. So it would take the collective agreement on both ends of the seller and the buyer for it to work. And per current provisions and the proposal that have not succeeded, the government is pretty clear and knows that it requires to explore other opportunities. But the case is there, and that's why also if you look at some of the discussions, CITES is pushing to say what should be done by donors, by supporters, to fund the conservation needs in Zimbabwe and other elephant range countries, and to invest in communities so that coexistence can happen, conflict can be reduced. So that option is being weighed.
Minister Ndlovu saying that CITES ban on the ivory trade and sale of live elephants to international buyers is leaving the country with limited choices, but you're saying that discussions are underway for choices. What could they be that would be acceptable to both?
So just as an example, there is an initiative already to create an African Elephant Fund. Essentially, this is a dedicated trust fund. It was created a couple of years back, and all it requires is for genuine donor countries and institutions to put money there that will be allocated to satisfy the requirements for conservation management that the government of Zimbabwe requires. And this has not happened. And so it can easily be frustrating. But what is very clear and convincing to us as an organization and to me as a Zimbabwean is the government is open to options that will simply allow them to successfully manage the elephants and other wildlife species, and in the same vein, be able to ensure the communities that coexist with this wildlife are benefiting and not simply suffering the brunt of the losses.
What is CITES saying about why the ban should be limited to sales within the continent? It is, to my understanding, particularly when we talk about extinction of wildlife and fauna, and it's to say that it can be used as an educational tool, particularly in countries where they are not exposed to these species, teach them about them and how to conserve them further.
So the initial, condition of sales within their range is to simply ensure that species remain within their native ranges and are utilized there. And then secondly, there's also been very clear cases where certain exports have not necessarily landed the species in situations or habitats that are conducive for their well-being, which is also from an animal welfare standpoint. And then thirdly, we do realize that there is a lot of space in the original, elephant range that elephants can move on. And part of what Zimbabwe and other elephant range countries are doing with IFAW and other organizations is to explore securing safe passages for elephants to be able to move and distribute across the whole region. So essentially saying we have enough space in the places where the elephants belong, and that in itself is a heritage that we should, as a government, Zimbabwe and other parties in Southern Africa, guard jealously for people to come and pay money to see the elephants in the wild where they belong. So that's part of the whole rationale. Then other issues relate to even the issues of diseases, etc., and just managing the whole process. But there are very clear guidelines of CITES management authorities needing to look at the protocols where that might become an exception, and that's the reason why that's being done.
All right.